These successful UK businesses will now have a very unique opportunity to invite highly professional applicants such as scientists, software developers, programmers to come to the UK and support the growth of their business. And they will be able to do so with the help of a very unique UK immigration route, which is called the Scale-Up Visa. This is a very unique route because it allows the sponsors to invite the applicants. So all successful applicants will usually get 2 years leave to enter. So in other words, a visa or leave to remain. And only after remaining here for 6 months, this may become an unsponsored route. So in other words, it's no longer a requirement for someone to be sponsored for the entire duration of their stay here in the UK. So in this video, we are going to discuss 3 requirements which all applicants will need to meet in order to succeed in the application. We are going to cover very unique eligibility requirements and not so unique but very, very important validity requirements. So we are going to talk about the procedural part, we are going to talk about the form and also the fees. We are going to cover the switching or rather no switching rules, and finally in this video I'm going to show you how you can check if you meet the suitability requirements. So let us begin. The UK Scale-Up Worker Visa is a points-based route, and therefore there are 3 requirements to satisfy: the validity requirements, the suitability requirements, and the eligibility requirements. As you probably know already, if you watched my videos, the validity and the suitability requirements are almost identical for the majority of points-based system applications. It is my intention to start with considering the eligibility requirements, and then at the end of this video I'll talk about the validity and the suitability requirements. The eligibility requirements consist of a number of points, and the ones which you need to satisfy will depend on whether or not you're going via the sponsored or unsponsored route, and I'll explain to you what this means in just a moment. For now, let us talk about the entry requirements. All this means is that if you would like to remain in the UK, to enter or remain in the UK as a UK Scale-Up worker, you need to make an application outside the UK in order to enter in this immigration category. So even if your nationality is not on the visa national list, for example, if you are from Canada, you still need to make an application from outside the UK in order to get a permission from the UK government to work in this immigration category. Because it's a points-based system application, you need to score 70 points for the application. So 50 points is going to be for making either sponsored or unsponsored application, and I'll explain in just a moment what is the difference between the two. And then we'll need to score 10 points for the English language requirements and 10 points for the financial requirements. So let us have a look at the sponsored applications first. There are 3 elements of the sponsored application. First of all, we have the sponsorship requirements. Then the applicants will need to prove that their job is at an appropriate skill level, and then they have to also show that their salary is at the appropriate salary level. These sponsorship requirements. First of all, every single applicant will need to show that they have the certificate of sponsorship. That is, it is valid, issued by an A-rated UKVI licensed sponsor, and most importantly, this sponsor will need to be authorized to sponsor the job under the Scale-Up route. It should not be issued within more than 3 months before the date of the application, and also the certificate of sponsorship will need to have certain details. The certificate of sponsorship is a digital document. It is highly likely that if the sponsor is authorized to issue certificate of sponsorship under the UK Scale-Up route, they're very well aware of what details will need to be included in the certificate of sponsorship. However, I would like to mention them in this video as well. So the certificate of sponsorship will need to have your name and your surname, and also they will need to confirm that you are being sponsored as a Scale-Up worker. They have to have your job details, what salary you are receiving, specify how much you will be paid, and also they'll need to have your pay details. Secondly, in this certificate of sponsorship there should be a start date confirming when you intend to commence your employment, and it should not be more than 3 months after the date of the application. Also, your employer, or the Home Office calls them the sponsor, will need to confirm that they expect you to work for them at least 6 months, and the certificate of sponsorship cannot be used with any previous applications which were either granted or refused. And the words granted or refused are crucial here, because if your application was recognized as invalid or void or withdrawn, then you can still use your certificate of sponsorship. You cannot use the certificate of sponsorship if it was refused or if the application was granted. However, if your previous application was invalid, void or withdrawn, you can still use the certificate of sponsorship again. And let me explain what they mean by the terms valid, void or withdrawn. The definition of the valid applications can be found at the immigration rule number 34. In very simple terms, it means that the applicants followed the correct procedure. In other words, they've satisfied the validity requirements. So when submitting the application, they completed the correct, not out of date application form. And because all application forms are now online, in the majority of cases, it's not possible to complete an out of date application forms. And also they say that all sections of this application form will need to be completed. Again, it's not possible not to complete the relevant sections of the application form if you're submitting an application form online, because the system will simply not allow you to submit the application without completing these fields. And also, for the application to be valid, you need to pay the correct fee. Again, it's not possible not to pay the correct fee if you're submitting your application form online, and you have to also pay the correct immigration health surcharge. You'll need to submit proof of your identity, nationality and age, and usually this is done with the help of your passport. Guys, if you're watching this video and you do not have a valid passport and you are unable for whatever reason to apply for a valid passport, I suggest that you check this rule 34.5, where they explain what alternative proof of identity the Home Office will be prepared to accept. The applicants will be expected to be over the age of 18, and if they're applying, for example, as a dependent family member, they'll need to submit a written consent from the parents or guardians of that applicant. And finally, for the application to be considered as valid, you'll need to submit biometrics. We'll cover this once again when talking about the validity requirements. Okay, now what do they mean by the application being void? This is defined at paragraph 34Ka. The easiest way to understand what they mean by the void application is to give you a couple of examples, which I have taken from the Home Office guidance. So what they say here, the application will be considered as void if someone made the application for limited leave to remain, but they already have indefinite leave to remain, or when they made the application for leave to enter or remain, but in fact they were exempt from immigration controls. So, for example, when they are diplomats or they're members of the home forces and so on and so forth. Or when someone made the application for leave to remain, whereas in fact they should have submitted their entry clearance application, or in other words, it's known as leave to enter. So technically the application form they've completed was incorrect. Another example, when we have an application from a dependent family member where the main application was withdrawn, and also when we have an application submitted by a British citizen or an Irish citizen, which was not necessary. As we know, they are not subject to immigration control, and therefore for this reason the application was void by the Home Office. So that was our void application. And what do they consider by the withdrawn application? This is explained at Rule 34X. The Home Office explains that the application will be treated as withdrawn if someone made their request to return a passport. And I've seen this mistake made many times before, when someone needed to travel urgently and they've submitted the application to the Home Office. They were under the impression that once the Home Office received the application, they had an opportunity to examine the passport or possibly make a copy of their passport, then they could request their passport back, whereas this is not the case. And usually when such a request is made, then the application is withdrawn, so the application is cancelled and you need to make another application. So be very careful when you request the Home Office to return a passport. Try not to do this, because this application will be treated as withdrawn. And also, if a person leaves the UK, then this application will be treated as withdrawn. Or when someone made an application for an administrative review and they did so in writing. And also an administrative review application will be treated as withdrawn when an applicant made another application while the administrative review application was still under the Home Office's consideration. So these were the definitions of our valid, void and withdrawn applications. The certificate of sponsorship should not have been withdrawn by the sponsor and not cancelled by the Home Office. And this will be checked by the decision maker at the time when they're considering your application. And finally, if your job requires an academic technology approval scheme certificate, then the certificate of sponsorship should confirm this as well. The next element of the sponsorship requirements, I called it the genuineness requirements. All applicants will need to show to prove that their job exists, it's not a sham, and it was not created solely to help the applicants enter the UK or make the application for a permission to stay. And the last element of the sponsorship requirements is called the third-party requirements. The sponsors will need to show that they will not hire an applicant to the third party. It doesn't really matter whether on a temporary or permanent basis. So the main beneficiary will be the sponsor and not the third party. And also the sponsor will need to prove that the applicant will not undertake an ongoing routine role or to provide ongoing routine services for the third party. Okay, so that was our sponsorship requirements. The next element for the sponsored applications, in order for someone to score 50 points, is the job at an appropriate skill level requirements. And here is how we can prove this. When you apply, you'll need to check that your job is listed at Appendix Skilled Occupations for the Scale Up route. And let me show you how you can find this. So if you go to your browser and you type Scale Up going rates for eligible occupations, the first website, the first.gov.uk website is the one you need. So as you can see, there is a document which is called Scale Up Going Rates for Eligible Occupations. So when you open this document, you can see we have the Scale Up Going Rates for Eligible Occupations, and you need to check if your occupation is on this list. So as you can see, here is the code and here is the going rate for the occupation. So it's not enough for the sponsor to pay at the minimum required level. They have to also meet the going rate requirement, but I'll explain this in just a moment. It is of crucial importance to find the correct occupation code, and you are the one who is responsible for doing this. So just make sure that your sponsor found an appropriate code for you. The Home Office takes a number of steps in order to ensure that you found the right code for the application. So first of all, they investigate whether or not there is a genuine need for this application, whether or not you have appropriate skills. They can do so by analyzing your CV and your history of employment, and also they'll check the sponsor's history of compliance with the immigration system. Their reputation is really important here, and they will consider any circumstances surrounding the case. And there are two options of finding the correct code, and both of them involve Office for National Statistics website. Let me show you how you can check if you have the correct code for your profession. So if you go to your browser and you type the current standard occupation classification for the UK 2020, we are not in 2020, but they publish this information every decade, and the last one was in 2020. So if we click this button, here is the page we need. So we open this one, and as you can see, here is the index you require. So that was by index, and now let me show you how you can do this search. So if you type Office for National Statistics Occupation Coding Tool, this is the one you need. So if you would like to work, for example, as an engineer, you can do a search of your code here. And these are all the codes you need, and you will have to go through all of them just to make sure that you find the best match for your circumstances. Okay, this is how you could check whether or not you have the appropriate occupation code for your job. And now, as you can see, they keep mentioning at different places the ATS certificate. This is incredibly important for you to check as well whether or not you require one when submitting your application. And I would like to show you how you can check if you need one. So if you go to your browser and you type Appendix ATIS and the first.gov.uk website, this one is the one you need. In this appendix, they explain explain the requirements, and they also give you the codes where you will be required to apply for the certificate before making your application. So they have the codes and the job titles, so just check whether or not you are on the list. If you are, this means you are not exempt and you will need to make an application. And another point to note here, at Appendix ATS, they list a number of the countries where the applicants, even if you have any of these occupation codes, you will still be exempt if your country is here on this list. So this is how you check whether or not you need to submit the ATS certificate with the application. Okay, so that was our job at an appropriate skill level requirements. And finally, in order for you to score 50 points for the sponsored application, you'll need to prove that your salary is at the appropriate required level. So first of all, the minimum income requirement is the £33,000 per year, and it has to be at least £10 and £10 per hour. And also, as I mentioned before, your job will need to be above these rates and at the going rate for your profession. Let me show you what I mean by this. So if you go to your browser and you type scale up going rates for the eligible occupations, we already done this search, so you know how the document looks like, and you check the going rate for your occupation. And let's say you intend to work as a chief executive or and a senior official with the code of 1115. And let's say they intend to pay you 34,000 a year. So this means that you'll be meeting these particular two requirements, A and B. So the salary is going to be above £33,000 minimum rate, and also it's going to be more than £10 and £10 per hour. However, you will not be meeting the going rate requirement, because for this particular job title you will need to earn at least this amount, £67,300. So when checking whether or not your salary is at the appropriate rate, you need to check all three elements. As you can see, they all go together. The next question to address is what's included in your salary. Only the guaranteed basic gross pay. And also, I have copied an extract from the Home Office guidance, which allows you to have a general understanding as to what's not going to be included in your salary. So the application is going to be refused if your pay cannot be guaranteed. So in other words, your working hours and your hourly rates fluctuate, or where your sponsor promises you an additional pay for shifts, overtime, or bonus pay. Your pension and your national insurance contributions will not be included. Any allowances such as accommodation and costs of living allowance are usually not included. Equity shares, health insurance, school or university's fees, company's cars, food, etc. One-off payments, any payments relating to the immigration costs such as fee or immigration health surcharge, these will not be included. And also any payments to cover business expenses, these will be excluded. So guys, as I said, only the guaranteed basic gross payment. Another important point to note here, that only the first 48 hours are going to be included in the Home Office calculations. So even if you intend to work 65 hours a week, your salary will be adjusted by the Home Office accordingly. Let me give you an example. So let's say you would like to work 60 hours a week, and you will be getting £12.50 per hour. So you'll think that your salary is going to be £39,000, and that is because you take the number of hours you're going to work per week, and then you multiply it by the amount you are going to earn per hour, and then multiply it by the number of weeks you have in a year. However, this is not so, because the Home Office will only include the first 48 hours of your contract. So what they're going to do in order to adjust the salary in these circumstances, they're going to take your hourly rate, £12.50, multiplied by 48 hours and multiplied by 52 weeks. So as far as the application to the Home Office is concerned, you will be earning £31,200 and not £39,000. Another very important point to note here is that the going rates from this table over here are based on a 39-hour work weeks. So if you intend to work more or less, the going rates are going to be adjusted accordingly. And there is a special formula which they will be using in order to adjust the figures in case you're working not 39 hours per week. So they're going to take the going rate for the occupation and then multiply it by the number of weekly working hours which your sponsor stated in the certificate of sponsorship, and then they're going to divide it by 39 hours. So these were the rules which you need to note with regards to the appropriate salary requirements, and if the sponsorship requirement, the job ads an appropriate skill level requirements and the appropriate salary requirements are met, then this means that you will be able to score 50 points for the sponsored application. But at the beginning of this video, I did mention that there are two types, the sponsored and the unsponsored types of visas. And now I would like to explain the circumstances under which you'll be able to make your unsponsored visa application. Guys, first of all, you need to understand that you can make your unsponsored application only after your successful sponsored application. As the name suggests, unsponsored application is when you don't need a sponsor in order to extend your stay in the UK. And there are certain rules which apply to unsponsored applications, meeting which you'll be able to score 50 points. So let us begin with the first one. You must have had monthly pay earnings in the UK equivalent to at least 33,000 per year during at least 50% of your permission as a scale-up worker. For example, if you were granted a 2-year scale-up worker visa, you must have had this level of earnings during the first 12 months. Here is what is not going to be included in this salary. So any earnings from the self-employment, earnings from outside the UK, and also payments not recorded through payee. So only your salary as an employee will be calculated, and also they will not include employer pension and employer national insurance contributions and any income from savings, investments, property, inheritance, gambling, or competitions. So these are not included, only your earnings as an employee. If you were absent from the UK because you were on statutory maternity, paternity, parental or shared parental leave, or because of the statutory adoption leave, or because you were on sick leave, then these absences from work will be disregarded. And then we have the genuineness requirements. The Home Office wants to make sure that your income was not fabricated, inflated, and relates to the genuine employment. The business exists and is lawfully and genuinely trading. They will take into consideration any payments made by the applicant to the other parties and all other surrounding circumstances. If this is satisfied, this means that your unsponsored application will be granted. Irrespective of whether or not you are making your sponsored or unsponsored application, you will need to meet the English language requirements. If you are not exempt and if you are not from the majority English speaking country, which can be checked at Appendix English Language, you will need to pass a test at the level of at least a B1 in all 4 components: in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And that is level 1 of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. If this is satisfied, that's another 10 points for the application. And finally, as I mentioned before, all the applicants, irrespective of whether or not they're making their sponsored or unsponsored application, will need to meet the financial requirements. You don't need to show funds if you are making your permission to stay application and you have been residing in the UK for at least 12 months. In these circumstances, the financial requirements will be automatically met. If your sponsor, who was A-rated by the Home Office, decides to help you meet the financial requirements, first of all, they'll need to mention this in their certificate of sponsorship, and secondly, they'll need to prove that at least this amount, £1,270, will be available for the first months of your stay here in the UK. If your sponsor does not help you meet the financial requirements, then you'll need to do it yourself. And you can easily do so by showing that you have at least £1,270 in your bank account, and this amount will need to be in the bank account for at least 28 days. And these guys were our eligibility requirements. As I mentioned before, if you're outside the UK, you'll need to make an application to enter the UK in the UK Scale-Up Worker category, and then you'll need to score 70 points either for the sponsored or unsponsored application depending on your circumstances, and additional 10 points for meeting the English language requirements and 10 points for meeting the financial requirements. These were our eligibility requirements, and as I promised, I'm going to go through the validity and the suitability requirements very quickly with you. As we've established before, if you don't meet the validity requirements, the application will be void. And it's very, very easy, guys, to meet the validity requirements. All you have to do is to make sure that you comply with the procedural part and also you comply with the switching rules. So the procedural part consists of 5 points. First of all, you'll need to complete the application form. If you're making your application outside the UK, the form is called the Scale Up Visa form. If you're in the UK, almost the same name of the form, the Scale Up form without a word visa. Then you'll need to pay the fee and the immigration health surcharge. At the date of recording of this video, the visa fee was £715, and the immigration charge, if you are the main applicant, is going to be £624 per year. And if you're applying as a dependent of someone who made the application for the Scale Up worker visa, then it's going to be a reduced rate of £470. As with all applications, you will be expected to submit evidence of your age and nationality and identity, which is usually with the help of a passport. You'll need to be over the age of 18 when submitting your application, and you'll need to submit your biometrics. And if you're making your application outside the UK and you were residing in the UK, which is listed at Appendix T, for more than 6 months, irrespective of whether or not you are a national of the country which is on Appendix T list, you'll need to submit a tuberculosis test certificate. So these were our 5 procedural steps, and also you have to make sure that you comply with the no switching rules. They're very simple. If you're making your application in the UK, you cannot switch to the Scale Up worker immigration category if you're here as a visitor or as a short-term student or as a parent of a child student, or you came here as a seasonal worker or as a domestic worker in a private household, or if you made your application outside the immigration rules. So no switching from these immigration categories. If you are in one of these immigration categories, you'll be expected to go back to your country of origin and reapply from outside. So these were our very easy and straightforward validity requirements, and now let us talk about the suitability requirements. The suitability, in very simple terms, this is proving to the decision maker that you have good character. The suitability requirements are listed at Part 9 of the immigration rules, and if you're applying from in the UK, in addition to meeting Part 9 of the immigration rules, you also have to make sure that you have a valid visa when you are here. In other words, you are not an overstayer, unless Paragraph 39E applies. Paragraph 39E is widely known as a 14-day rule. So in other words, the Home Office will be disregarding your period of overstaying in the UK if you submitted your next application within 14 days. And that is if you were unable to submit your application on time for the reasons which were beyond your or your representative's control. And also if you overstayed your leave to remain during COVID period from 24th of January 2020 until 31st of August 2020. And also, as you can see, certain exceptions apply to those who applied for a permission to stay on the Hong Kong British National Overseas route. And these were our suitability requirements. So if you met the eligibility requirements, the validity requirements, and the suitability requirements, your application is most likely to be granted. If the application is refused, unfortunately, you have no right of appeal and you will only be able to apply for an administrative review. If you made your sponsored application, it will be granted for 2 years. And then if you decided to extend your stay by making an unsponsored application, it will be granted for further 3 years. There will be certain conditions imposed on your stay when you're here in the UK. So if you made your application under the sponsored route, then you can work in your sponsored job for at least 6 months. Then you can leave your sponsored job after 6 months. You can study. You can bring your partner and your child, dependent child, who is under the age of 18 and who is dependent on you financially. You can take an additional work, including becoming a self-employed. You can volunteer. You can travel abroad as many times as you want to, and you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. You can settle in the UK after 5 years. As with the majority of other points-based applications, you will not be allowed to claim benefits. There are certain exceptions which apply to this rule, and you will not be able to claim state pension. You will not be able to work as a professional sports person, and during the first 6 months, you cannot change employer unless you apply to update your visa. So these were the conditions which will be imposed on your stay if you succeeded in your sponsored application, and if you made your unsponsored application, you can continue working in your job. You can change or stop doing your job without telling the Home Office. You can be self-employed, and you can extend your scale-up worker visa without a new sponsor when your current visa expires. And again, you cannot apply for most benefits or a state pension, and you cannot work as a professional sports person, for example, as a sports coach. And these were our very simple and straightforward requirements which you need to meet in order to succeed in your UK scale-up worker visa. Guys, if you found this video useful, I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have an amazing day.